Hey everyone, what is up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold, and today we're going to be talking about something, yeah, well, not really different. I've talked about shootings before, but this one is something else. This is the Walk of Death shooting that was committed by Howard Unruh back in 1949 in Camden, New Jersey. I do want to say everything I looked up is all the sources will be linked in my description box, and you can look at all the sites and all the sources, all the words that I'm using. They are my words, my thoughts, and everything that I have. Basically, it's my thoughts that I've put together in regards to everything about this case. There's a lot. So let's talk about Howard Unruh. So Howard Unruh was born to Sam and Frida Unruh on January 20th of 1921. He had a normal and unremarkable life. His parents separated when he was young. He had a brother named James, or went by Jim, in which they were raised by their mother in Camden, New Jersey. She would work for Evanston Soap Company as well as a packer, and she would be the sole provider of her sons and herself. So the only thing that's really out of the ordinary is that he didn't speak and he didn't walk until he was about 16 months old. And potty training took a very long time, apparently. Other than that, he was very pious. He attended church regularly, which was normal at the time, and he read his Bible as he was expected to by his mother and by the community. He kept to himself and he was very shy, in which you could probably tell what type of person he was by what he liked to do. He had a avid stamp collection and he loved to build model trains. Those were his hobbies. Following high school, he would enroll in the Army on October 27th of 1942. He was in active service between 1944 and 1945 in Europe. He also would receive 3 medals from the military. This would be the Victory Medal, Good Conduct Medal, and the European Theater of Operations Medal. He ultimately would be honorably discharged when World War II ended, and he would go back to living with his mother. But this is when it was noticed that he was nervous, mentally detached from the world, and he was moody. Instant alarm bells right there. He would work as a sheet metal worker briefly before going to Temple University School for Pharmacy Studies, but he would leave school due to his poor physical condition. His mother would ultimately support him and her during his decreasing and declining health as he stayed home, and he would begin to exhibit OCD-like tendencies. He would make sure everything was neat and tidy, all of his guns and everything else he's collected during his military career would be hung up on the walls. He even would turn the basement of the apartment into a shooting range, because back then apartments were basically like a part of a house. So whatever floor they were on, plus the basement, that would be their apartment. During his decline in his mental status, this is when his relationship between him and his neighbors would worsen, and his brother James actually recalled seeing a tiff between the Cohens and him and Unruh, because Unruh would use the Cohens' backyard as access to his apartment, but he shouldn't have been doing that because he was walking through their backyard. So he was kind of in the wrong, which this also just kind of like goes in with everything. You'll see a little bit later. So around 7 a.m. on September 6, 1949, in Camden, New Jersey, I also looked this up. This is a Tuesday. 28-year-old Howard Unruh was having breakfast consisting of 2 fried eggs and a glass of milk that his mother had made him that morning. Pretty typical for this time in which we're discussing. Breakfast would be made by the woman of the house to start the day, but this day would be anything but normal. You see, apparently, after she told him of his breakfast, he would run down to get a wrench and he would flail it around at her, like in a threatening way. She then would flee the home. She would, like, this day would continuously get worse. And she would go visit a neighbor, Carolina Pinner, and this would leave Howard alone, which is not something that should have been done, but she was scared. She was afraid he was going to do something, and she was right, and because he would do something. At around 9:20 in the morning, this is when he would leave the home, but not without some things in his pockets and in his hand. You see, he had ammunition in his pockets. He had his Luger P08 and an 8-round magazine with him. This is when he left the apartment. He would walk down River Road, which is now called River Ave. We'll talk about that later too. As he walked down the road, he would come across a bread delivery truck, and this is when he would hold his pistol through the door and shoot at the driver. He indeed would miss, and the driver then would try and warn somebody about what happened, but nobody, nobody around him, no, none of it. Yeah. Unruh then would go to a shop in which he knew the owner. The owner was that of John Pilarchik. He would go in and shoot him, killing him instantly. Next was Clark Hoover. You guessed it, Clark Hoover is another neighbor. He's a barber who, in fact, was another neighbor. He was giving a haircut to a 6-year-old at the time. The 6-year-old was Orris Smith, and unfortunately, Unruh shot at them, in which resulted in Smith getting hit in the neck and Hoover getting hit in the head. So the bullet went through Hoover's head and into Smith's neck. Both were fatal. Hoover was trying to shield the boy as he was sitting on a carousel-style horse while getting his haircut, and Hoover tried to save him after he saw Unruh come in with the gun and point the gun at them. There was another person in the barber shop at the time, and that was Orris Smith's mother, Catherine. She wasn't shot. Unruh completely ignored her, and she would end up carrying her son out into the road and screaming until a neighbor saw them, brought them into their car, and then brought them to the hospital, in which Orris Smith would be pronounced dead. Unruh then would go to Maurice Cohen's pharmacy. This is another neighbor. The Cohens is his next door neighbor, in which he would come to find himself not being able to get around a man named James Hutton. James Hutton was a known insurance man around the town. So, because Hutton wouldn't move out of the way to let Unruh go inside of the pharmacy, Unruh killed him as well. Maurice Cohen and his wife Rose saw everything transpire in front of the pharmacy, and this caused them to run upstairs to the apartment. Unruh saw this happen, and I would say wasn't too happy about this. Maurice would climb through a window and out onto a porch roof of the apartment, whereas Rose would hide herself and their 12-year-old son in different closets of the apartments. Unfortunately, when Unruh went looking into the apartment, he would find Rose and shoot her 3 times through the door of the closet prior to opening said door and then shooting her in the face. She, of course, died. This is being shot that many times. Obviously, you would be deceased because of it. Fortunately enough for their son Charles, who is 12 years old, he would be hiding in another closet in the apartment. So it's believed that after he shot Rose, he then went across the way to Minnie Cohen's apartment, which is the mother of Maurice. She was 63 years old, and she was trying to call the police at the time when he came into her apartment, and he shot her multiple times. It is also believed that Maurice came back inside their apartment when Howard went back into that apartment, and he saw him. He then ran back onto the porch, and then Howard shot him in the back, which then caused him to fall off the roof porch and fall onto the pavement below, thus killing him. And like I mentioned, Charles was in the other closet, and he was able to escape without being injured. After leaving this building, he then would walk out into the middle of River Road and shoot right into a sedan that was approaching him. This is when he killed Alvin Day, who was a TV repairman, and after shooting him, Alvin Day is dead. His car is still going, so it then veers into the sidewalk. Next on his list was another neighbor, Thomas Zagrino, who had a tailor shop, but he wasn't there, although his wife was there. Helga Zagrino was there, so this meant that, Howard will kill her. She would go on her knees and beg for her life, but didn't mean anything to him. He shot and killed her. Thomas is the only surviving target of this killing spree that was on Unruh's mental list that he had, which he didn't have a physical list. It was all up here. He next would shoot the locked door of a grocery store, which resulted in no deaths. Following this, another car would be shot at. This car was just simply at an intersection, and he killed Garland Helen Wilson and Emma Matlock. So in some transcriptions, her name is Helen, and some are Garland. So I put both the names together just to be safe. So Garland, Helen, Wilson. So the son of Helen, which is his name is John, he would end up dying the following day at Cooper Hospital, which will also come up again later. Um, yeah, so while passing another building, Unruh would shoot through a window of an apartment building, and it said that he thought it was like somebody else in the window, but he actually killed a 2-year-old. His name is Thomas Hamilton. The woman that was actually watching Thomas Hamilton, her name is Irene Rice. She would end up being treated at the hospital as well, but for severe shock. Um, let's see. After shooting into this apartment, he then shot at another car that was driving down the street, but the persons inside the vehicle were able to stop and flee from the car, and they ran into the tavern that was nearby. A person that was just, a witness to the scene, his name is William McNeely. He said that he saw Frank Engel leave the tavern that they were in and shoot at Howard Unruh. He missed and ran back inside. It's believed this is probably when he got shot, but that's another thing we'll discuss later. Howard would continue his rampage and walk down the street, and he would just continue to fire. It's like he didn't even get deterred by what this dude Frank Engel did. Yeah. He would miss some, but he would continue to try and kill more people. He would also strike Madeline and Armand Harry. Their last name also shows up as Harris. So that's another like discrepancy between transcriptions. This is a mother-son duo that was hanging their linens out to dry. They would survive their wounds, thankfully, but many had died at the hands of Unruh. To be clear, 13 died at the hands of Unruh and 3 were injured, 2 of which were shot at, which would be Madeline and Armand, and the other one was just injured. I would assume was probably from Alvin Davies' car as it was, hit. So after shooting the Harrys, Unruh ran out of ammunition and he could hear sirens from afar. He then went back to his apartment. He would ultimately be surrounded by police very quickly, but that isn't all. Philip Buxton, who's a journalist from the Camden Evening Courier, would call Unruh. He found his phone number in the directory and he would talk to him on the phone. He ended up asking him how many people he killed, and Howard would just respond with saying, "I don't know yet because I haven't counted them, but it looks like a pretty score." This journalist then would ask him why he did what he did, but Unruh said he couldn't answer that. Also, I want you to think about what's going on right now in the background of this conversation while Howard's on the phone with this journalist. Howard's actually having a gunfight with police at this point because he refused to surrender at the first part of him, like the police being outside of his apartment. This gunfight would then end with Howard having 2 tear gas bombs thrown into the apartment, and he would come out surrendering. He would be handcuffed by Earl Wright, who's a sergeant of the Camden police force at the time. After he came out, a cop would say, "What's the matter with you? Are you psycho?" And Unruh would just look at him and say, "I am no psycho. I have a good mind." Yep, you heard me right. That's what he said. They were able to determine that he actually fired 33 rounds during his attack, but he had so much more in his apartment. He had what was described as an arsenal of weapons along with his marksmanship medals. He was known for his shooting. Also found on the table was a Bible that was open to Matthew chapter 24. I also have a link for this in the description box. If you don't want to listen to this part, you can just skip ahead a little bit. If you're not familiar with this chapter in the New International Version, which is the NIV version of the Bible, this is translated to be the destruction of the temple and the sign of the end of times. In this passage, it talks about Jesus leaving the temple and walking away. It also talks about seeing a sign from God and learning certain lessons from the angels. In the passages as well that are labeled the day and hour unknown, this talks about Noah and the ark and watching out for who is faithful and not faithful. But every text in the Bible is up for personal interpretation. It's whatever you think it says, that's what it is. It's up for your interpretation. That's why every single sermon that's read in any church or any religious meeting is up for interpretation, and nobody's going to say the same exact sermon twice. Nope, no way. I will let you know this too. His mother, Frida or Rita, she went by both, would faint following the gunfire after putting everything together as to what her son did. heard the sirens, heard the gunfire, and she knew. She was still at her friend's house. Just wanted to put that out there. As we learn about Howard's actions in the hour leading to his rampage, we can kind of gauge our perspectives a little more. So on the evening of September 5th of 1949, this is just a day prior to Howard's rampage. Yes, this is Labor Day. He decided that he wanted to go see a movie. There's a reason why I'm doing this. So he would leave his apartment in Camden and travel to downtown Philadelphia to Family Theater. That night, there was a double feature that would show The Lady Gambles and I Cheated the Law. But it's not the movies in which he was fully interested in. Oh no. He was there to actually meet up with a fella that he was having an affair with for the last few weeks. But Howard would end up getting caught in traffic on the way there, and his friend wouldn't be at the spot in which they would meet on Market Street. This is actually a very well-known area in which homosexuals would meet up on Market Street. Yeah, it's very well known at that time. Howard was extremely bitter about this, and he would just sit in the dark until 2:20 a.m., in which he would just see a constant looping of the same movies playing over and over again, and he was just sitting there brewing and stewing and bitter about everything. When he would finally make it back home, he would find the fence that he had just put around the yard in which we were discussing earlier, you know, the yard he was fighting the Cohens about. The fence had been tampered with. You see, the neighbors next door and him were fighting with one another, and this was to solve the issue. Howard put up a fence and a gate to solve the issues, but the gate was gone when he got back. Yeah, this triggered something. All of this frustration, all of it just triggered something. Bam. So apparently for years, he had been thinking of killing his neighbors, and all the issues just continued to build until his psychosis became too much. And with this, he started planning his plan, like his plan to kill them. And him exacting his plan of what he wanted to do to rid his world of his issues was to build a list of who he wanted to kill. This was a mental list. That's why I said mental list. This involved the pharmacist, the shoemaker, the tailor, the owner of the restaurant. It like just a few hours after this, so I would assume he probably passed out around 5 a.m. His mother made him breakfast, so he ate around 7, and then he would commit the walk of death around 9:20 in the morning. This walk of death lasted 20 minutes, so from 9:20 to 9:40. That's it. After he was arrested, he was taken to the station, and Unruh was very informative of all the actions of what he did. I know that was not a really good segue back into him being in custody, but I wanted you to hear everything that led up to what he did. So he was very informative of all the actions that he took, of what he did. A few hours after or into his interrogation, they would look at him and they would discover that there was actually a pool of blood underneath his chair. And I'm not surprised that he didn't feel anything because he probably has all this adrenaline going and he's talking about everything he did. So he's feeling really happy about the things that he did because he's retelling them. That's what serial killers and mass murderers do. They get really excited. They get off on this stuff. So that's probably why he didn't feel any pain. So this meant that he had a GSW, or a gunshot wound, to his left thigh. He was taken to Cooper Hospital to be treated like one of our other victims, and it was determined that he was shot in either the butt cheek or the upper thigh. It's believed this happened when he was being shot at by Frank Engel. Yeah. He was officially charged with 3 counts of atrocious assault and battery and 13 counts of willful and malicious slayings with malice aforethought. Following his arrest, he would be seen by a psychologist who would deem him as a paranoid schizophrenic. But when he was discharged from Cooper Hospital, he was actually sent to New Jersey's Hospital for the Insane, which is now called the Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. He would be in a private cell in the Vroom building, yes, Vroom, VROOM, in a maximum security holding cell. This is where he would remain until he died in 2009. He would actually go into a subsidiary unit, but I'll talk about that in a few minutes. It is said that in his last public words, he would have killed 1,000 more if he had enough bullets. So there was no way to rehabilitate Howard Unruh. He still felt the same way he did many years later. So following his internment, Sam Unruh, which is his father, was ordered to pay Howard's upkeep of $15 a month for the Trenton State Hospital. For the next couple of decades, it was kind of like Howard just disappeared and he didn't exist. This was until 1964 when he put out a petition. It was put into play to have his indictment dismissed due to how he was insane at the time of the shootings. But he withdrew this. He withdrew this because due to understanding that this would end up being used if he ever went to trial, for his defense. This is something he didn't want. He didn't want to go to trial. He didn't want any of that. So he just, yep, he withdrew it. His mother also would end up visiting him until she passed away in 1985, which I'm assuming probably helped him in some capacity more than his mother would ever know. But following this, following her passing in 1985, this is when he became a severe recluse and he didn't talk to anybody. He didn't speak as much to literally anybody except for one other person, which I will discuss in a second. He would end up taking art classes while he was interred as well, which I would hope kind of helped him with his feelings, but sometimes people just keep bottled up. He would continue his stamp collecting, which we know was one of his hobbies when he was younger, which is good that he kept up with his stamp collecting as well. Fast forward to 1991, this is when a psychiatrist said that Unruh had only one friend while he was interred, and this person was just kind of like talking to him, and Unruh was listening. This is more like a one-sided companionship, but Unruh was a really great listener from what the psychiatrist said. So Unruh would remain in maximum until 1993, which is when he would be sent to a geriatric unit within the Vroom building, or the Vroom unit, which was less restrictive, and he would stay here until his death on the 19th of October of 2009. Most of the time, Howard Unruh is known as the father of mass murders, but this isn't right, actually. Just a year prior to this, Melvin Collins killed 8 people before taking his own life in a boarding house in Chester, Pennsylvania. Or even earlier than that, with the Earl family murders that transpired in 1902 near Welch, Louisiana. There have been a great multitude of shootings since and more dangerous as the time passes by. Because he was dubbed the father of mass murders, he has been used as an example when it comes to this type of behavior. His crime since has never been forgotten, and even now the neighborhood of River Street knows this legend of the Walk of Death. The apartment remained empty for the time being after his arrest, and the building that he actually lived in and the Cohens lived in, and the Cohens used as the pharmacy, is actually now Gomez Shoes on River Ave, not River Road. And I did look at pictures as well from of the day, like literally during the shooting, there was literally people taking pictures of the cops with their guns out, the crime scenes and everything like that. And after viewing some of the images, there's actually one of Unruh in the back of a squad car, and he's emotionless and void while he's sitting there with cops surrounding him. He's wearing a suit and a striped bow tie. There's also countless images of the crime scenes and of the building in which he lived. All of the buildings are still standing to this day, with many different businesses running within them or have been since then. But this neighborhood will forever be stained with the horrors that Howard Unruh let out on the fateful morning of 1949. There's also one really big crazy fact about this, which ties into another shooting. It's absolutely insane. All right, so crazy fact about this case is that the maternal grandfather of Carly Noble, who survived the Marjory Stoneham Douglas High School shooting on February 14th of 2018, is that of Charles Cohen. Charles Cohen is the 12-year-old son that survived the day of the Camden shootings, the son of Maurice and Rose Cohen. It is so insane that is a similarity between these. What's also a very odd coincidence is that she hid in a closet just like her grandfather did, so she did not die on the day of the shootings in which she was there for. It is one major tie-in between these. It is insane. I read it and I was like, what is going on? How is that possible? How is that plausible? All of the above. It's one of the major things that a lot of people like look at when they look. One of the major things they see when they look at this, because it's not something that you think would be a thing. I will say too, Charles Cohen died on September 4th of 2009, which is 2 days prior to the 60th anniversary of the mass shooting, like the mass murders. And also, he died 1 month prior to Howard Unruh dying. So I'm wondering if Howard waited out until one of the missed opportunities passed away. I know that sounds really bad, but also the shooting I am talking about with Carly Noble is the Parkland shooting. If you didn't catch that, she was a part of the Parkland shooting, and her grandfather is Charles Cohen. Yeah. But anyway, that, my friends, is the Walk of Death. This is it's crazy. It's wild. And I read it and I was like, there's also some other shootings, because I was looking at the Earl family shootings, which is the one from 1902, and I was like, this is strange. And then I found this one and I'm like, And then I read the thing about Melvin Collins, and Melvin Collins literally didn't have a Wikipedia page when he has a Murderpedia page, but he didn't have a Wikipedia page when the what was it? When the article about Howard Unruh from the Smithsonian that I was looking at was published. And this was published back in 2015. He didn't have a Wikipedia page, but now he does, which is kind of cool. So I've been looking at some of these mass shootings to see what the common denominator is between them, because you don't always know what the common denominator is. It's very, like, I don't know, it's just weird. So that, my friends, is the Camden shootings, the Walk of Death, all committed by the perpetrator of Howard Unruh. I hope you guys learned something from this, and I'll see you guys in my next one.